So this is a bit late, but the unemployment numbers for last week came out this past Thursday. It's Tuesday of the following week now, so it's a bit late. But I wanted to talk about it, just present this information and then discuss a little bit, just sort of react because it's pretty staggering. So this is from a Forbes.com article on April 3rd. It's by a data journalist, Neil McCarthy. Sorry if I said that wrong. First thing, just take a look at this chart. This is really, like I said, staggering. What you're seeing here is the weekly unemployment numbers stretching all the way back to 1970. And what you can see is that, as they pointed out here, the jobless claims from the past 2 weeks are literally off the charts. This is unlike anything that we've ever seen in the history of this country. Let me read from that article. There was dismay when the U.S. Department of Labor reported that the number of Americans newly applying for unemployment benefits increased to 3.3 million in the week ending March 21st, a figure completely out of proportion with previous peaks that occurred the fall of 1982 and March 2009, when initial claims had reached 695,000 and 665,000, respectively. As bad as that was, there was far worse to come when the Department of Labor released its figures for the week ending March 28, showing an increase to 6,648,000, quite literally off the charts. And he continues, as alarming as the figures for the second half of March are, it is difficult to compare them to past economic crises, given that the US and the world in general have never experienced such a sudden halt to economic activity before. Just to reiterate what he pointed out there were two previous peaks for weekly unemployment claims. The first was from 1982. This was the previous high from 1982 was 695,000. In 2009, in the sort of height of the 2008-2009 housing economic crash, the highest number that we saw there for weekly unemployment claims was 665,000. So what we're talking about from last week is an increase on a magnitude 10 times greater, 10 times the previous highest, worst weeks we've ever seen since they've been tracking these numbers back in 1970. So that's 50 years. So in 50 years, we have seen nothing like this. And I'm having trouble putting this into words. 10 million people became unemployed in the past 2 weeks alone. 10 million Americans. To look at that is 6% of the entire 6% of the entire workforce. So there's about 165 million people, 164 million people in the workforce, active in the workforce in America. That's 6% or 3% of the entire population of the country. Just became unemployed in the past 2 weeks alone. So what that means is that 1 in every 30 or so people in the past 2 weeks, and let's just be clear here. So I just want to make one other thing clear. These numbers are absolutely the minimum number of unemployed people that there were, because many people are struggling to even get onto unemployment because these systems have been so overwhelmed, because there's nothing like this in history. These statewide unemployment systems were completely overwhelmed and completely unprepared for something like this. So let me read from, and so let's just take a look at a few different recent articles just to show you that there's been overwhelm of these systems, and it's not a one-time thing. This has been an ongoing issue from the start of this crisis. This is the headline from March 17th Politico article. It says, coronavirus layoffs surge across America, overwhelming unemployment offices. From an ABC News article on March 25th, headline, state labor departments are overwhelmed with unemployment applications. New York State's Department of Labor has seen a 1,000% increase in claims. That's a 10 times increase over the norm. Another one from April 2nd in USA Today. Really overwhelmed. Americans are facing mounting issues filing for unemployment during COVID-19 crisis. So what we're seeing here is that, and this has been in states all across the country. This is not, unique to New York. I've seen reports from this all across the country. So 10 million people unemployed. Many more are 10 million people filing for unemployment. Many more have become unemployed. And this is not the end of this. So, and we have to realize something, right? When people become unemployed, it's not just that you become unemployed in this country, right? And because of our employer-based health insurance system in this country, what this also means is that 10 million people in the past 2 weeks have found themselves without health insurance. Now, many of those folks would have health insurance till the end of the month, but note that the end of the month for most of these people was March 31st. So they are losing their health insurance as of April 1st. Many of these people, I would, wager a guess that the majority of these people have no health insurance. Now, I'm privileged. Now, let me just say, I'm unemployed right now. I'm a software engineer by profession, but I'm unemployed right now. We can get into my personal story later. It's not a result of the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic, but it is an interesting story to say the least, and I would love to discuss that sometime if folks are interested in hearing more about that. And so I will likely dive deeper into that in the future. But suffice it to say, I certainly can empathize with these folks because I've been through it before and I know what it's like when you become unemployed. I mean, nobody expects to become unemployed. You go into work or you show up that day or you wake up that morning thinking you have a job, and then all of a sudden that job is ripped away from you in an instant and you're stuck holding the bag, already under the stress of income, rents in this, the price of rents, the cost of rent in housing in this country is absolutely absurd. And you're all of a sudden thinking, how am I going to make rent? How am I going to buy food next week? 78% of Americans, according to a 2017 survey from Career Builder, 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Okay. So that means that 4 out of 5 people, and I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that it's disproportionate, that it's disproportionately impacting those paycheck to paycheck, those folks living paycheck to paycheck. I'm willing to bet that this unemployment crisis is disproportionately affecting them. So while 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, I'd be willing to wager a guess that more like 90% of the people that are losing their jobs right now are living paycheck to paycheck. So what does that mean? That means that all of a sudden when you're living paycheck to paycheck and there's no next paycheck, you are in a personal crisis. Forget the global crisis that you're already under. You're also facing just your personal crisis. You're worried about how you're going to pay those bills, how you're going to pay rent, stay in your home. And on top of that, in this twisted country, we also have to burden all these people with the fact that you're going to lose your health insurance. Now, just think of the insanity of that. 10 million people are losing their health insurance in the middle of a global pandemic. That's absurd. That is the most backwards thing I can imagine. This is so inhumane. How can we do this to people? There was some article, I think it was by, I'm going to mess up her name. She's such a great voice and activist and in academic. Her name is, it's something, Kianga Yamada Taylor, I believe. I apologize. You are an amazing person, and I apologize for getting that wrong if I did. But she is a great academic, and she wrote an article, an op-ed, I think, I forget where it was published recently, called Reality Has Just Endorsed Bernie Sanders. And it's true. The reality that we're living under right now, it's endorsing Bernie Sanders. Yes, I'm a Bernie supporter. I'm a Bernie bro. It's endorsing Bernie Sanders. It's endorsing things like Medicare for all, housing as a human right, a $15 minimum wage. And I think that is just nowhere near enough in many of the sort of urban centers of this country. I don't think that $15 an hour that's $30,000 a year. I mean, that can barely cover the rent at my last apartment. It was, $25,000 a year essentially. It could have been more. I'm just going off the top of my head. So you're talking about, yes, reality here is endorsing Bernie Sanders. It's endorsing these ideas like Medicare for all, because who could, in their right mind, if you aren't a insurance, CEO or investor or, on the executive board, one of these health insurance companies, who else is around here? Or you're sitting in our Congress right now because they bought all of those people off. Who is sitting around saying that it's humane to leave millions of people without health insurance in the middle of a pandemic? And think about what that means too, because it's not just their lives that we're saying that we're putting in danger. It's not just their lives, because viruses don't, only attach themselves onto the unemployed or the poor people or the people without health insurance. No. What happens when my neighbor doesn't have health insurance? Even if I do, I can still, or the person that I happen to cross in the grocery store, or, whatever it is. Just like, in this country, we used to have, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure this is the thing. I think Richard Wolff talks about this. Dr. Richard Wolff, economist, Richard Wolff talks about how, in this country, we used to have something like a fire insurance. And what it was that if you bought this insurance, then if your house caught on fire, the fire trucks would show up. But quickly people realized, well, what happens if I have insurance, but my neighbor doesn't have insurance and their house catches on fire? Even if I have insurance, if they don't have insurance and their house catches on fire, well, there's nobody showing up to put that fire out. And lo and behold, it may spread and engulf my home and burn my home down before I can do anything about it. So we got rid of some crazy system of let's have fire insurance. It's the same thing with health insurance. Let's be honest. This is absurd. If somebody gets sick, I want everybody to be healthier. If my neighbors, if the people in my community are healthier, well, then that's going to promote better health for myself as well, right? So it's just to say that these are absurd things, and we absolutely have to do better as a society, as a country. We have to do better, and we cannot, in the midst of an economic crisis and a global pandemic, be throwing tens of millions of people off of their health insurance. It's inhumane, it's absurd, it's immoral, it's just gross, and we have to do better. One other thing I'd like to add to this, and I want to do a deeper dive on this in another video, but I just want to mention the corporate bailout that we just saw. So this was the economic stimulus package. I just want to say that the response from our Congress has been woefully insufficient to help these unemployed people. Now, thanks to Bernie Sanders, there was an amendment and a provision put into this economic stimulus bill, let's just call it the corporate bailout, that adds $600 per week to unemployment benefits for anyone that's filing in the midst of this crisis. So I think that's great. That's amazing. That's the least we can do for folks. I honestly think, whenever you become unemployed, you're in the midst of a personal crisis, whether or not there's a global crisis going on around you. When you become unemployed, you're in a crisis. And I just wish that these provisions would be permanent, because if you need the extra help now, you need the extra help after this crisis and before this crisis too. And so we should be upping those benefits for everyone across the board. And yes, I'm biased, obviously. But what they did was they've made this $2 trillion stimulus bill, but $500 billion out of that $2 trillion is put into a fund that can then be leveraged at 10 times the rate. So what corporations are getting out of this recent economic stimulus bill, it's about $1.5 trillion for individuals and small businesses. And mind you, not just individuals are having trouble getting this unemployment benefits. Small businesses, it's been reported, are struggling to get relief from this economic stimulus bill as well. I saw something recently that said thousands of small businesses had applied and still zero loans had been approved still. So they're supposed to be giving small business loans, but from what I understand, the Small Business Administration is pretty much the worst government institution, just bureaucracy. It's really slow moving already, and now you add this on top of it, and it's just beyond overwhelmed. So $1.5 trillion went to individuals and small businesses. $4.25 trillion has gone to corporations, big corporations. So just quickly, let me just show you this this is from an article in the American Prospect by David Dayen, great voice on this topic of corporate bailouts. He studied these a lot, and I just want to read this from that article. So this is an article in the American Prospect titled "Unsanitized Bailouts, a Tradition Unlike Any Other." And this is from March 25th. So he says, "The enormity of this bailout is being underreported. The number you're hearing is 500 billion. Of that, 75 billion goes to the airline industry and the mysteriously named businesses critical to national security. The other 425 billion helps capitalize a 4.25 trillion with a T leveraged lending facility at the Federal Reserve. The taxpayer dollars would soak up any losses from that lending program. The loans won't be secret anymore, but the oversight is largely after the fact, without subpoena power, and mainly reduced to writing reports. How exactly do you expect a small, underfunded panel to find fraud in a $4.25 trillion lending facility, especially when the current administration explicitly believes they are not required to turn over anything to Congress?" So I just wanted to point out that 4.25 trillion, and let's just make one thing clear. I did some math on that. So 4.25 trillion, if you were to divide that up amongst every single person in the country, just based on the most recent population numbers, it's estimated at around 330 million Americans. That's everyone. That's not just people in the workforce. That's everyone in the country, even people under 18, newborn babies. So 330 million people. If you divide that 4.25 trillion up amongst those 330 million people, what you get is $12,880 per person. So $12,880 per person in this country with 4.25 trillion. If you divide that up over 6 months, what you're looking at is $2,146. If you divide it up over 12 months, it's about $1,070. So if we were to provide what I think we needed was at least temporary. I mean, we should make it permanent, but at least a temporary universal basic income is what was needed. That was what was needed to stem the sort of tide of this situation and to protect not just our economy, but working class people. And so if you were to provide just say a 6-month universal basic income with that 4.25 trillion, you could have provided every single person in this country $12,880 over 6 months. That would be $2,000 a month for 6 months, or $1,070, about $1,000 a month for a year. So we could have implemented essentially a universal basic income that would have lifted everybody up, kept them in their homes, kept them from facing uncertainty and, economic ruin. And also it would have trickled up, that money would have been spent back into the economy versus, these corporate, bailouts where the provisions are so weak. It has things like no stock buybacks over the term of the loan, but as soon as the loan's over, you can do stock buybacks again. You can also pay out dividends, and you can raise CEO pay with this money. So we saw what happened in the 2008-2009 bailout. It looks like we're about to repeat history, and they say history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. This one is definitely rhyming with the 2008-2009 economic crisis. So I want to dig deeper into that, because that deserves a segment of its own, this corporate bailout, and really digging into that and looking at, just seeing how that's a mistake that's happening right now in front of our eyes. And so, yeah, let's do better, folks. We got 10 million people unemployed in the last 2 weeks. More to come. Numbers, there was an estimate from a Federal Reserve chairman in St. Louis. I'm blanking on his name right now. Bullard, I believe his name is, Kevin Bullard. And he estimated that we would have a 30% unemployment rate. I saw another number, I believe maybe this is from the same Federal Reserve official in St. Louis, but 32%. I saw numbers as high as predicting 32% unemployment. Mind you, during the Great Depression, the worst unemployment got was 24.9%. So we're talking about unemployment, and that's 1 in every 4 Americans. 30% of, 32% of people, we're talking about 1 in every 3 Americans being unemployed. That's every single family in this country being impacted and negatively impacted and really suffering, honestly, because of the lack of a social safety net that we have. You're talking about 1 in 3 Americans being without a job in the midst of a global pandemic, without their health insurance. It's just evil what we do to people. We have to do better. Thank you so much. You just watched a Radical Democracy video. I'm your host, Kamali Rose, and I just wanted to say thank you. And also, please do me a favor and subscribe below. Also, smash that like button and come back for more. Please hit the bell as well. Hit that bell on the notifications and select to get all notifications so that whenever we launch a video, you get it first. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again soon. Peace. Pretty good, I think. I like it.